Hi, I'm Bob McLean. I'm a Certified Information Systems Security Professional, or CISSP. Thanks for checking out my channel. In this video, I'm going to focus on cybersecurity for the small to mid-sized business segment and speak to business managers and owners rather than technical professionals. The newsworthy and well-covered cyber attacks suffered by larger corporations may not seem relevant to small businesses, but they are. And the attacks that made the news in the first half of 2021 help prove some points all businesses should heed to reduce their risk of cybercrime having a big negative impact on their business. So I'll touch on the big attacks suffered by Kaseya, Colonial Pipeline, and Ubiquiti, and relate some of what broke down for them to your small information technology shop. In late June, I attended the Design to Parts Contract Manufacturing Trade Show in the Mohegan Sun Convention Center. I hope to speak to owners and senior managers of small manufacturing companies about their experience with cybersecurity in general, and if possible, learn more about someone's 800-171 cybersecurity self-assessment efforts. For those of you not in the Department of Defense supply chain, NIST, National Institute of Standards and Technology, special publication 800-171 defines cybersecurity requirements for safeguarding controlled unclassified information. There's a regulation in effect requiring any company in the DoD supply chain to perform and submit a cybersecurity self-assessment and have a plan of action and milestones document to address gaps in that the assessment uncovers in order for them to continue to do work for the Department of Defense. As you may imagine, meeting cybersecurity requirements could be an issue for smaller contract manufacturers who may have state-of-the-art manufacturing abilities but are small enough not to have their own IT departments, let alone cybersecurity staff. The IT managed service providers, or MSPs, who handle information technology requirements for smaller companies are often not large enough to themselves to warrant keeping a cybersecurity specialist on staff for assessments and compliance work like 800-171. I got to speak to a few companies who were able to share their stories, and I want to say thank you to them again. Their experience goes a long way, so thanks again. And the companies that I did get to speak to had quite a range of experience. I met a couple of folks from one company in the DoD supply chain who had their 800-171 requirements all buttoned up, and I met others not in the DoD supply chain who were commercially focused, who had minimal cybersecurity practices, processes, or infrastructure that could help them weather a cybersecurity attack. I expected a wide range, but talking with managers who themselves expressed frustration in not understanding IT and cybersecurity, or not being given sufficient budget for IT and cybersecurity measures, it emphasized really how wide the experience with cybersecurity could be in the smaller manufacturing market. I heard firsthand stories of people dealing with ransomware attacks, and that's not surprising. According to Coveware, a company that tracks ransomware attacks and publishes statistics, the brunt of ransomware attacks is borne by companies with 11 to 1,000 employees. Those with 11 to 100 employees represent 30.5% of all cyber attacks through Q2 of 2021, and those with 100 to 1,000 employees were targeted 38.7% of the time. That's 69% of the cyber attacks through Q2 2021 being borne by companies with 11 to 1,000 employees. That's quite a disproportionate market share for the company size. Ransomware threat actors view the smaller companies as easy pickings because they know the companies aren't large enough to retain cybersecurity professionals, and they know the probability is higher that these companies have insurance policies, and they know that these companies have a better percentage or a greater likelihood to pay the ransom just to get back in business. Beside the financial impact of paying the ransom, insured or not, an unsecured company can be an initial access vector to their business partners and their networks. Also, the Biden administration has deemed ransomware and cyber theft a threat to the economy and thereby a threat to the national security of the United States, and issued an executive order in early 2021 authorizing interagency cooperation on threat identification and mitigation to start with. So in light of all of this, and the fact that I friggin' hate how successful cyber criminals have been and continue to be, I'm going to do a series of cybersecurity videos based on the NIST Cybersecurity Framework Core, and I'm going to do those after I'm done with this one. I'm going to start, and I'm going to use the Cybersecurity Framework Core as a guide so that everyone can pick up some details and implement what they can. There are a lot of opportunities for companies with little to no cybersecurity budget to greatly improve their cybersecurity posture with processes, procedures, and configurations of their existing technology. Cybersecurity basics like password rotation policies, system patching, and other processes and procedures played an enormous role in the huge breaches of 2021 and have had a direct impact on smaller companies and their networks. Shortly after the D2P convention in June, specifically on July 2nd, Friday of the July 4th weekend, the software company Kaseya was hit by a ransomware attack that flowed down to their customers, who were mostly managed service providers, and their customers, who were mostly small and medium-sized businesses. Approximately 60 MSPs were hit, as well as approximately 1,500 of their downstream customers. Small companies, just like everyone exhibiting at the Design to Part convention. To be clear, I don't know if any exhibiting companies were hit, but it's not inconceivable that one or more were, based on the company size and IT usage profile of the exhibitors and the scope of the attack. Kaseya Virtual System Administrator, or VSA, is a software tool that enables IT professionals to remotely manage other infrastructures, whether their own or that of a client. It is available as a cloud-based as a service, as well as through an on-premises server, the VSA server. It is used with enterprises or within enterprises, much like SolarWinds, but it has a large share of the MSP market. There is a lot to say about the Kaseya breach, and I will say more on a dedicated video or two or three. But what I want to point out is that Kaseya had been advised and alerted to the fact that their code contained a vulnerability, and they were alerted in April 2021, and they failed to patch it. This and two other vulnerabilities were used to breach customers' on-premises VSA servers on July 2nd. Also, their customer support and billing portal that was still online as of July 2nd had an unpatched vulnerability that had been pointed out to them 6 years ago. And that vulnerability allowed unauthenticated users to download files that contained usernames and passwords, and therefore granted access to all kinds of company and customer data. Kaseya has since taken that site down, citing it had been deprecated and unused, but it was still attached to the network, attached to their domain, and functional 6 years after they were alerted there was a vulnerability. The Kaseya attack brings into sharp focus the need to keep machines patched, especially any machines accessed from others somewhere else on the internet. Cybersecurity best practices also call for some configuration changes to network architectures. If a system must be accessible from the internet, it must be protected and isolated by a firewall. And at a minimum, those systems should have two-factor authentication enabled for its authorized users and only its authorized users and those who have a legitimate need for access. Maintaining an accurate inventory and ensuring that all obsolete systems and user accounts are deleted and cleaned up. Maintaining this accurate inventory is a vital part of a comprehensive security plan outlined in the NIST cybersecurity framework, which I'll get to in another video. But beginning to do this kind of inventory management is always just a good thing. The group that carried out the ransomware attack on Colonial Pipeline gained their initial access through an old user account on an old unused piece of hardware, specifically a VPN concentrator. By nature, a VPN concentrator has to be accessible from the internet. Two-factor authentication on a patched VPN concentrator dramatically lowers the probability the attackers would succeed in breaching any company's network. Back in late December 2020, or January of 2021, there was another significant breach that was overshadowed in the news cycle by the SolarWinds supply chain attack, and that was the Ubiquiti breach. Ubiquiti matters to small and medium-sized business sectors because the MSPs who service them often specify, recommend, or purchase Ubiquiti products to offer their services. Ubiquiti makes, among other things, wireless access points, network switches, network routers, security cameras, and security camera recording systems. Ubiquiti products are also in the realm of the Internet of Things. They connect to Ubiquiti servers in the cloud for software updates. They can pull down software updates, and they can all be managed from a cloud-based application. They promise lower cost of ownership, and they leverage cloud-based services and systems to be able to manage more devices with fewer people. The attackers compromised a password vault of a Ubiquiti employee who is a senior member of their IT team. Apparently, the account was not protected with two-factor authentication, and it was not protected with the strongest password in the world. The attackers had administrative privileges across all Ubiquiti devices for a period of time and could have intercepted and read all communications passing through devices. All of their cryptographic keys were stolen. Remember, this is a senior IT specialist whose password vault was cracked. Like Kaseya, there's a lot more to be said about this Ubiquiti breach, and hopefully I'll get to it in videos down the line. But it was so bad, and the extent of the breach was so bad, that a whistleblower filed a complaint on the Ubiquiti whistleblower hotline, as well as alerting the European data privacy authorities. The attack had been downplayed, and the extent of the exposure was not revealed initially. It took a whistleblower. I don't want anyone to take away that the password vaults are no good, but they are as strong as the password and the person who creates the password and whether or not two-factor authentication is enabled. If the vault is protected by two-factor authentication and the password is strong, complex, and unique, a password vault can be a great thing. However, if the password is guessable or easily cracked, for example, my Ubiquiti password, a vault would be a liability. In other videos on the channel, I talk about a thought process for selecting long, complex passwords that would be difficult to crack and easy for people to recreate and remember. So please check out one of them if you can. And they might get a little long, so I might have to re-record them, but there are some good pointers in there. But getting back to Ubiquiti, the risk to small and medium-sized businesses is that non-Ubiquiti passwords could have been compromised and customer data could have been stolen. There's no way to know exactly. The data was accessible to the attackers for about 2 months. A forced password reset across all systems and devices and accounts should have happened a long time ago. If this is something you don't regularly do, you should do it as soon as you possibly can. People are inclined to reuse strong passwords they think of because they're easy to remember, but you should never use a password, from one system or service to another. Don't reuse passwords. I'll wrap up by restating a few key points. Small to medium-sized businesses are attacked the most by ransomware actors. Small and medium-sized businesses are vulnerable due to the absence of regular cybersecurity guidance and the increasing number of attacks and the sophistication of attacks. Newsworthy breaches of big-name brand companies can involve SMBs directly, as in the case of Kaseya, where SMBs got caught downstream of the major attack, or indirectly, where a compromised company in the supply chain exposes confidential data, passwords, trade secrets, etc. Cybersecurity best practices begin with basic processes and procedures. Passwords matter. Every password should be unique, long, and complex. Every password should be changed regularly, every quarter, for example, for every user and every system with an administrative interface. Every privileged and administrative account should be protected by two-factor authentication. It may seem like a drag at first, but people will get used to it. Every system accessible from the internet must be protected by a firewall. And every system accessible via the internet or hosting an application accessible from the internet needs all patches applied on a priority basis. Any system that manages a tool, for example, a 3-axis milling machine that costs $350,000 to replace, that runs on an obsolete operating system on an old computer using an old application that runs the machine just fine, but is no longer supported by any manufacturer because of a corporate acquisition that eliminated that machine. Those machines need to be isolated from the rest of the network via or with a firewall. They're easily compromised and can be a jumping off point for a cyber attack. And no one's downplaying the importance of those machines. They just need extra protection on their own segment off a firewall. Also, all inactive systems must be removed from the network, and all outdated sets of credentials must be set to inactive. These points may seem really obvious to IT and cybersecurity professionals, but this was for people running other businesses that may need a reminder that the simplest sounding tasks and measures can have a big difference. And lastly, make sure your critical data is being backed up. Make sure it's being backed up frequently enough on systems and media that then disconnect from the network. Ransomware variants seek out and delete backup volumes. So make sure they're not connected to the domain. Test your backups. Know how long it takes to restore. Test a restoral. And if you have an MSP, have your MSP come in for a tabletop exercise of what if this breaks, what if that breaks, and validate all of your assumptions so that should you suffer a breach, you know how much data you'll miss while the system's down being rebuilt, and you'll know how long you'll be out of business and how long to expect before you can return. Many systems or many victims of the Kaseya attack restored from backup, and others were forced to start negotiating with the cyber criminals because they did not have good backups. So be very mindful of your data backups. Figure out what systems make money, what systems directly contribute to staying in business and maintaining your operation. Make sure they're backed up and that they can be restored. Test if you can. So please subscribe to get the alerts as to when I release my next videos. Hopefully they'll get more frequent. And until we speak, take care.